What's up guys, welcome back to the SLOPAR Boys YouTube channel, and on today's video we're going to be talking about my 2019 Ram 1500 that I just got done lowering. If you're new to the channel, my name's Isaac. If you're not, well, welcome back. You might see a little guest in the back here, Hemi. He might pop in and out of camera view. Hemi, you gonna say hi? There he is. So, on today's video, we're gonna talk about the process for lowering my 2019 Ram 1500 Laramie Sport that was equipped with an off-road package from the factory. The off-road package basically means that there's a couple slight differences in the suspension compared to a normal truck, but it's nothing that we couldn't handle and that wouldn't make the kit not work. Now originally I had a whole cinematic planned for this video. I wanted to show you guys putting the truck on the tow truck and bringing it down and putting it up on the lift, taking the wheels off and doing the actual whole installation. But it ended up being more trouble to do it that way, especially by myself, for me to record and try and make it as good of a quality content as I'd like for you guys and do the installation on my own. It just wasn't going to work, so I figure I'll just give you guys a little bit of a walkthrough, but at least I'll show you guys what was leading up to the actual installation itself. So here you go. This is my 2019 Ram 1500 Laramie Sport, and it came equipped with the off-road package from the factory. So the off-road package basically means that the front struts are an inch taller, the springs themselves inside the strut are an inch taller. On the rear of the truck, it's got a different track bar bracket that mounts up to the actual axle, and then it's also got taller springs in the rear. The Max Trac 2.4 drop works for 2019 Ram 1500s, but it doesn't work for trucks that have that off-road package. So we had to figure out some workarounds, and through talking with members on the 5th Gen Ram forums and talking to Max Trac a little bit, who actually attempted an install on this truck, turns out there are some ways to kind of work around it. So I started off by going to my local dealer, and I found another truck online that had an identical setup to my truck, except it didn't have that off-road package. Axle ratios, every single thing about the truck was identical. So I took my VIN number, and I took the VIN number from that truck, and I brought them into the dealer, and had the dealer give me a parts list for the front suspension and for the rear suspension of both trucks. I then took the two part lists and compared what part numbers were identical to each other and what part numbers were different. Basically, the Max Trac installation goes as follows. You would take the front struts out of the truck and you would actually disassemble them. You would use a couple parts like the upper strut mount and the lower strut mount. The new strut that comes with Max Trac's kit does not include the spring, so you'd be using the spring from your factory suspension. So what I did instead is basically bought all the parts that I needed for a normal truck and put the Max Trac struts together that way. I actually had a local shop nearby do that for me. It was something that I wasn't really comfortable with. I don't have the equipment to do it, so I didn't bother dealing with it. The nice thing about it was it means that I now have a direct suspension swap. So if I ever wanted to bring this thing back to factory, I could literally just pop these front struts out, pop the new ones in. So installation for the front was fairly simple. All you would do is take the 2 lower cam bolts off of the lower control arm, and the back of the control arm kind of drops. You'd unbolt the bottom of the strut, take the 3 nuts off the top of the strut comes right out. Nice and easy. You disconnect the sway bar on the front just so that you can actually drop the lower control arm a little bit lower, but you don't have to remove the knuckle from either the upper or the lower control arm. You don't have to pull the axle out. You should have just enough space to actually fit that strut in and then just bolt it right back up together. Installation time, because we didn't have to take apart the front struts, we only put them right back in the truck. Took about an hour for the front suspension. By the time we got it up on the lift and took the wheels off, started dismantling things, figured out what tools we needed to have out and have accessible, it went pretty easily. So installation on the rear of the truck took a little bit longer than the front, but it was fairly easy and fairly self-explanatory. So we started out by removing the shocks, removing the sway bar and links from the axle, this way that we could actually drop the axle down completely. Oh, and we removed the track bar at the same time. Once we got all of those removed, the axle was able to drop down and we were able to pull the factory springs out. So differences right off the bat between Maxtrac's kit and the original suspension was that the factory spring that came on my truck was 6 inches taller than the Maxtrac spring. All you do is you use the factory spring isolators for the top and the bottom, and you just basically put the spring right back into place. That's the easiest part of the rear axle that there was, other than just installing the shocks. The only difference to that was that I actually put airlift bags inside those rear coils. That way I can still tow and I can still put stuff in the bed if I really need to. The airbags from airlift that would normally fit a 2019 Ram 1500 don't fit for a lowering kit. So instead we used airbags that are actually for George's Durango. Installation of the bags was fairly easy. Obviously we didn't use the instructions that came with them because those would apply for the Durango, but basically the installation went as follows. The bag goes inside of that coil, and then you just run your air lines together to a T-coupling and then right to the back of the truck where I mounted it next to the license plate. Basically ran the lines just up, left a little bit of slack for suspension travel and whatnot, and then I ran the passenger side up and across one of the bed rails and did the splicing there, and then I ran the line all the way to the back to where the license plate is. Once we did that, the coils went into place on the axle, and then next it was time for us to install the shocks. Now this is where I think Maxtrac's kit kind of lacks, is those rear shocks, they are not the best quality, and that's just me being brutally honest. Go online, do your research, and I'm sure other people will say the exact same thing. The rear shocks on these kits are just flat out junk. So that'll be another project, is for us to figure out a new rear shock for it. So we tried to get away with not removing the fender liner in the rear, but unfortunately the way that the top of the shock is mounted to the frame, you do end up having to take out the rear fender liners. It was one of the more tedious parts of this whole project. It was just getting them put back into place. It took forever for us to do. The next step to the install was us installing the track bar. So the Max Trac kit comes with a track bar drop bracket. So it's a bracket that mounts up to the axle, and then it basically shifts your track bar into proper placement so that it keeps your axle perfectly centered in the rear. However, this truck being an off-road package truck, that bracket does not fit on here. Now, when we were doing the install in the first place, I honestly didn't think that the rear axle would have a different track bar bracket, considering that the off-road package is only an inch lift on the truck. If you go to rough country and get yourself a 2-inch, or a 3-inch lift kit for these trucks, are you really gonna end up adjusting the track bar? Generally speaking, no. You just mount it on and call it a day. So I didn't really think that the axle would be that much different, but it is. So that track bar bracket does not work. So for us to compensate for that, we installed a Freedom Off-Road adjustable panhard bar. The bar mounted up to the factory locations, no problem, bolt slid right in. The only thing we did there was we left it a little bit loose. That way, once we put weight back down on the truck, we could actually make the fine-tuned adjustments. The last refinement that I made to the rear suspension was a Hellwig rear sway bar and then the Hellwig adjustable sway bar end links. Now, on the topic of the sway bar, the installation is pretty much complete at this point. Everything just bolted right back together. We dropped the truck back down on the ground and noticed that the axle was sticking way out to the right side. So using the adjustment on the track bar, we shifted it right back to the center. It was really easy to do. You could do it just by hand. You didn't need a wrench to actually tighten or loosen up the adjustment on the track bar itself, even with the truck under full weight. At this point, the wheels were back on the truck was down on the ground, the track bar was as good as it was going to get, and the next thing that we were going to do was toss it right back on the tow truck. So the purpose of me putting it on the tow truck was that I just got brand new tires for this thing, especially putting them on the brand new wheels that I had, and I didn't really want to chance driving it about 50 miles to where my buddy's house was that had the lift. So I just towed it to the shop. That way I didn't have to worry about any kind of uneven tire wear or just messing anything up. Who knows the way that the suspension was sitting. And based upon the cam bolts when we first took them out and we marked them, they're completely different from when the alignment was done. I'll include a little snapshot of the alignment sheet. The next day, picked up the truck and finally got to take it for a drive. As soon as I left the shop with it, I noticed the first issue. And the first issue is actually a pretty simple one. And it was that I completely forgot to recalibrate the tire size. And the way I noticed it was that the transmission felt like it was just shifting a little funny. So the summer setup for my truck is the factory Ram 22-inch rims. And they're wrapped in Toyo Proxy ST3s 305 45 22s. So a little bit wider than the factory tire and just a hair taller than the factory tire that came on my truck. Through talking to some of the guys on the Ram forums, they said that I should be able to fit it. I should have clearance between the upper control arm and the lower control arm, no problem, and I should be able to have no issues when I'm turning. So anyways, I stopped at a gas station nearby, shut the truck off, used the taser that I've already had installed, and recalibrated the tire size. I went online and just did the math for what the factory's tire size was in comparison to these ones. The original tire size on the Taser was 32.07. I brought it up to 32.100. As odd as that sounds, that's the way that the Taser had it on the dashboard. I won't argue with it. All I know is that it's dead on calibrated. Now we finally went for a drive. And then this is where we started to encounter some of the issues that I later on had to resolve. The first issue that I had was that I noticed that once I hit about 70 miles an hour, the truck would start to shake in the front end. So I just drove it around for a little bit and just kind of said, you know, maybe things just need to settle in and we'll see how it is and just run with it. The kit's just brand new installed. Maybe things need to just settle. Anyways, the next issue that I noticed was that I actually had a clunking coming from the rear end of the truck. It took me forever to find out what it was, and it basically took me to just mount the GoPro on the side of the truck to figure out whether it was coming from the front or the rear. I couldn't tell for the life of me when I was driving with all the windows down, could not tell where that knocking was coming from. Long story short on both of those, the shaking that was coming at 70, 75, and that would kind of go away at like 80 miles an hour, ended up being overpressured front tires. So I never bothered to check the tires once I got them mounted at the shop and balanced. Turns out that the front tires were at 60 PSI. Probably not the best. Dropped them down to 40, kind of a happy medium spot between the factory specs and just going a little bit taller. And it worked perfectly fine. Truck drove completely different. So the next step was figuring out the clunking that was coming from the rear. The clunking that was coming from the rear took a little bit of playing with to really figure out. The first thing that we did was change out the sway bar end links. So the Max Trac kit comes with a set of really short sway bar end links, and when I had installed those, it put the rear sway bar at kind of an upwards angle, and so I wanted to fix that, and so I ended up using the adjustable links that I had bought in the first place and never installed in the first place. Those sway bar end links, shortened up to their lowest setting, actually put the sway bar dead level with the ground, so I'm really happy with that. The next step in our troubleshooting of the rear end clunking noise that I discovered was the shocks that came with the Maxtrac kit. So the shocks that came with the Max Trac kit actually came with these little metal sleeves that go inside the bushing where it mounts up to the axle. I never bothered to put them in because they wouldn't go in easy enough. And we tried pressing them in, we tried lubricating them, and they just would not go in. So driving the truck around for a little bit without those sleeves installed, the bolt that was going through that bushing ended up kind of opening up the bushing a little bit, and then when we pulled the shocks off, we were actually able to slide them in fairly easy. They still needed lube and they still needed to be pressed in, but they did end up going in. So it just made it a little bit tighter for the shock to be mounted. The last thing that we noticed was that the track bar actually ended up loosening up ever so slightly. The way that the track bar works is you have one end of the track bar, you have the other end, they come to an adjustment point. And then on that adjustment point are two lock nuts to actually hold it into place. Those lock nuts ended up backing off a little bit. And so the track bar actually had play like this. And you could do it from just laying down underneath the truck and pushing up and down on the bar. You could tell that it was moving and that there was an issue there. Needless to say, once we tightened all that back up, put the wheels back on the truck, dropped it back down, drove it for a little bit, it was clear as day that that problem was instantly gone. At this point, I've had the kit installed on my truck now for about a month and a week. I put about 1,200 miles on it, and I put 1,200 good miles on it. I mean, I beat the bag out of this kit. This truck's probably not meant to be driven in that way, but I wanted to test it out, and I wanted to see just how well everything performed, and it's actually really nice. Other than the fact that I'm driving a lowered pickup truck in the city and that driving over potholes every day kind of sucks. Overall, I'm really satisfied with the kit. I love the way that the truck looks. The wheels rub only a little bit when you're cutting all the way to the left, and it's only the passenger side tire that does it, and it does it going forward and reverse. But if you cut the wheel all the way to the right, it doesn't rub at all. Other than that, there's an occasional rub on the front wheels on the inner fender liner if you take a turn a little too hard and you kind of go over a bump at the same time, but it's nothing that's not too bad, and that quite frankly won't wear itself out over time. So overall, I'm really satisfied with the way that the kit came out. I had a blast installing it. I love troubleshooting, and quite frankly, I think the trucks look better this way. So guys, if you stayed here for this long, thank you very much for tuning in. I know it's just kind of a lot of me blabbing about and not really getting a chance to show you guys everything. Again, I apologize. This is not the way that I wanted this video to go, but I still wanted to make some kind of video about it because it's a very unique setup for this truck. Nobody has done it from what I've assumed. Maxtrac told me that it couldn't be done. When I originally talked to somebody about getting their rear panhard bar, they told me that it wouldn't work for lower trucks, but quite frankly, the Ram forums speak otherwise, and talking to you guys on there gave me a lot of help, and I'm really glad I was actually able to get this kit installed. Before even buying this truck, I knew that I wanted to lower it. I just didn't know that the off-road package came with all these extra headaches to go along with it. So as always, thank you guys so much for tuning into today's video. If you liked the video, make sure to toss it a like. If you have any comments about what we're doing, what we should do better, whatever it may be, just drop a comment down below. And if you haven't already, please make sure that you subscribe. It helps out the channel tremendously, and we greatly appreciate it. Once again, my name is Isaac. We got Hemi in the back seat, and he's ready to get out of the truck. But we'll catch you guys on the next video.